Good evening, everyone. We're going to call tonight's meeting to order, and we will begin with an approval of tonight's agenda. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Stevens, all in favor? And that is carried. Disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest. Councillor Stevens?
I do have a conflict tonight. Under section,
8.2.
8.2. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think you have to declare the nature of your conflict as well.
Sorry, I'm the president of Orangeville Minor Hockey and the rate fees are included, so I should just step away.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens. We had no closed session today, so we will move into the singing of our national anthem, and I will ask that you rise if you're able, please.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nations and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is the traditional territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. Tonight's meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Tonight is a non-statutory public meeting, and normally I would turn the chair over to the Deputy Mayor, but both him and Councillor Prendergast are absent with notice today, so I will be chairing the public portion as well. So we will head into item 8.1, which is the 2025 water, wastewater, and stormwater rates. If there's anybody who would like to speak to this matter, please call 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID 112-044-629#. Callers will be invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of the meeting presentation. Any member of the public that's connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. And anyone who would like to be notified of further consideration of this topic can submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to Clerk's Department, CLERKSDEPT@orangeville.ca, or can call 519-941-0440, extension 2242, and reference 2025 water, wastewater, and stormwater rates. Note that any information collected is a matter of public record. We will now move into a presentation by Nancy Neal, the manager of Watson and Associates, Economist Limited. I do have a recommended motion, though, that council waive the 5-minute time frame in the procedure bylaw to permit Nancy to address council for a maximum of 45 minutes. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously, and I will turn it over to you, Nancy.
Thank you. Good evening. I think we're just trying to get the presentation up and running here. Sorry, am I able to minimize so I can see the whole presentation, or move it out of just seeing all of you up here on the screen? Be able to move that at all? Perfect, thank you. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be with you this evening. I am going to take you through a summary of the water, wastewater, and rate study analysis that we've undertaken with staff over the last few months to come up with recommended rates going forward for water, wastewater. Right now, you're already on a dedicated rate for those services. Stormwater, there are a couple of options that we'll be looking at for your consideration, because right now stormwater is recovered through property taxes, and this would be moving it to a rate base. So what we have done to undertake the analysis is look at, for these three services, the current and future expenditures for capital that is required over the next 10 years, identify funding sources for that capital program for each of the three services, and then also estimated future operating expenditures. Right now, you don't do a 10-year operating forecast, but we have worked with staff to project out a 10-year forecast for operating as well, with impacts from the capital-related program as well as those day-to-day operating expenditures that will be needed over the longer term. We've also included in their life cycle needs, so asset replacement of both current and future assets, and then come up with some new calculated rates for your consideration for water, wastewater, and as I mentioned, the options for a dedicated stormwater rate. For some background for yourself and the public, there has been extensive legislation for water and wastewater put in place since the Walkerton incident. That's almost 25 years ago now, but there has been 5 different pieces of legislation, some of which were fully put in place, others were partially put in place. The Safe Drinking Water Act is actually the piece of legislation that there's also a regulation tied to it that requires you to undertake a financial plan for your water system and to be submitted every 5 years to the province to get your license to take water and provide that service. So that is another piece that is required that you will be coming back to you in the future on that piece of it. The most recent piece of legislation is the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperities Act, which is the piece of legislation that requires you to embrace the asset management or asset replacement. So that is why we've included that portion in the study as well. So I'm going to focus first on water and wastewater because it's already a rate-based system. Currently, for 2024, for both water and wastewater services, there is a base charge that is imposed on customers, and it varies based on the size of the water meter. That is charged regardless of how much water or wastewater you actually use. So it's guaranteed income. In addition to that, there is an increasing volume rate structure for the volume rates. So for residential customers, for the first 20 cubic meters used, they pay $2.13 per cubic meter for water and $1.90 for wastewater. Anything over and above that monthly usage, they would pay a higher rate, $2.88 per cubic meter for the additional volume for water and $2.57 for the wastewater. When it comes to the non-residential customers, they again pay a higher rate after certain volumes, but the amount of the volume that's included in the first block rate really depends on the size of your meter again. In addition to those base charges and volume rates, those are for metered customers. There are still some customers that are not metered. Some of those customers, it's just they haven't been able to hook up. There may be issues for location that has prevented them from hooking up and getting a meter. They are charged a flat rate annually of $642.12 right now. And then there is also some unmetered customers that are refusing to have a meter installed. Those customers are being charged a higher amount at just over $1,280 per year. Right now, the metered customers, you have over 9,900 water customers and wastewater customers, and as well those compliant or non-compliant non-metered customers. There's 30 of them on the water side, 28 of them on the wastewater side. We are looking over the forecast period. We assume that the existing customers will stay. We are looking to convert and actually getting both the compliant and non-compliant unmetered customers metered by 2026. So we have assumed that they will come on to the volume rate and base charge and come off of those flat rates in this forecast period. In addition to that, you'll recall not that long ago, there was a development charge study and new bylaw passed to collect funds from growth. Through that study, the additional residential growth was identified, and we have worked in the growth in those residential units into the forecast. As new homes are built and they start using the water and wastewater systems, they will start generating revenue from that monthly base charge as well as their volume rates. Anytime that we include a new customer in the first year, we always assume that they'll only generate about a half a year's revenue, because some will be built in the beginning of the year and some at the end of the year, some in the middle. So we're conservative there. On the other side of things, there is non-residential customers that may be added. We've been conservative in not adding any additional volumes in for them, because it's very difficult knowing the size of a building, whether they will be a very large water user or a very small water user. If you think of a logistic warehouse, they're a very large building, creates a lot of square footage, but doesn't generate a lot of water volume usage or wastewater volume usage, versus a smaller type of business that might actually generate quite a bit of water. So it's harder to judge. Being conservative then, as you get new non-residential customers on, it should help to generate a little bit of a surplus that could then be used to help mitigate where costs may be budgeted and come in over budget, or help towards additional asset replacement in future years through reserve fund transfers. We have identified the residential customers looking at historic volumes. The average residential customer uses 180 cubic meters a year. However, when we look at the more recent builds, there is a lot more conservation in new homes with things such as low flush toilets and energy efficient appliances that are put in. And those customers actually average about 145 cubic meters a year. So we have assumed going forward, those new residential customers will all fall into that first block rate. Again, if some of them do use more, they may generate a little bit more on that second block rate going forward. Similarly, on the wastewater side of things, we have done the same situation. We've assumed those unmetered customers will be phased in and actually get metered in the next 2 years, and then we'll have new customers coming on as well. And you'll see as well, we are also building in a little bit of conservation to this, assuming that some of the existing users will they could do renovations and change things out and actually conserve a little bit more water too. Again, we always take a conservative approach to what we're assuming. If we assume too much volume and it doesn't actually take place, you'd run deficits. So we always want to be conservative there. When we looked at the capital needs, we looked at a number of different documents to provide us with that 10-year forecast, including your 2024 and 2025 capital budgets and forecasts, your asset management plan, the stormwater management facility needs assessment report, and the development charge study that identified all the growth-related works. We looked at them as regarding the need for them, estimated timing of them, and the cost of them, and we have smoothed some of those costs out over the forecast period. What it looks like in total from 2024 to 34 as a total capital program for water, it's just under $130 million that is required to be spent. On the wastewater side of things, it is just over 53.1 million. And you'll see on the bottom part of each of these charts the various different funding sources that we are assuming will help to pay. So there are some grants that are anticipated to come in, development charge reserves, money from reserves that you have for water, wastewater, and some debt, both growth related and non-growth related. When we look at the existing system, right now, total value or replacement value of your water system is about $268 million, and your wastewater system is approximately $263 million. What we have seen coming due, just based on pure life cycle, is between the two about $145.5 million that's due in the next 10 years or is overdue due to just the lifespan of when it was initially put in and those average useful lives. What we've actually included in the forecast is slightly different. On the water side, we've actually included more than what the pure life cycle shows, with 84.8 million in the forecast, and that's for various different reasons. As well, on the wastewater side, we've included about 41.5 out of the 66 million that is doing it. Some of those assets are performing well, and staff feel they will have a longer lifetime than the average engineered life cycle. At the end of what is still outside of this 10-year forecast, there's approximately 385 million that will have to be replaced in future years, year 11 plus. And we do a calculation to say if you are building into your rates about $15.5 million annually, then you will be putting money aside to actually be able to react and replace those future assets as they come due in the forecast as well. Now, right now, we're not suggesting 15.8 million of transfers to reserves, but we recognize as well that there are debt charges for outstanding for things that have been paying for the capital. And as those debt charges actually expire over time and are paid off, that funding source that's already built into your rates will then end up helping to pay for other future debt charges or be transferred to reserve for future asset replacement. In total, if you look at the very bottom line there, the footnote, what's important for your residents and businesses to understand is the town has invested right now almost $27,000 per property in water assets and another $26,500 in wastewater assets. So it's significant for every property, the amount that you have invested in these systems. On the operating side, again, we looked at your 2026 to 2029 budget or forecast and your 25 budget, and we have mimicked that. We have also provided, outside of the 2029 forecast period, other inflationary impacts based on what we're seeing in the industry, with 10% annual increases to expenses for utilities, chemicals, and insurance, 2.5% for salary, wages, and benefits, and then all other expenses have been inflated at 2% for those future years. Inflationary impacts for the stormwater side of it is similar, 2.5% for the salary, wages, and benefits, and 2% for all other expenses. What that looks like for a chart, the pure operating, day-to-day operation costs, as well as the capital-related expenditures that are the transfers to reserves or debt payments annually, they range from about 8.5 million for water, and over the forecast period will be at about $17.5 million annually. On the wastewater side, currently similar, you're at about $7.9 million annually right now, and that is expected to increase to about $15.4 million of what you will need to fund over the forecast period. With that, we have assumed 15% annual increases to that fixed base charge. Right now, the amount of revenue you get for that is fairly low, and yet a lot of your expenditures are already fixed regardless of the amount of water or wastewater volume used. So we have increased that charge to help get you more guaranteed revenue over the forecast period to be able to react to those fixed operating expenses. In addition to that, on the volume charge, we've looked at a 10% increase on water for 2025, 5% for the 2 years following that, then 4%, 3%, and 2%. So as we get out in the forecast, the rate increases decrease on a year-over-year basis. For wastewater, we're looking at a 5% increase for 25 and 26, 4% for 27, and then 3% thereafter. Again, because the flat rate customers are projected to be metered by 26, we've only applied inflation of 2% at the moment to those flat rates. However, staff will may be recommending something different for that, especially for the customers that are refusing to be metered. What that looks like as an average bill for a residential customer, if you're using 180 cubic meters a year and you're on a 5/8 or 3/4 inch meter, what you would be paying today for water is about $564. That would be increasing to $1,215 over the forecast period. On the wastewater side of things, you'd be paying about $515 now, and that would be increasing to just over $1,100 if that is your usage. As a total bill, it's an average of 8% increases over your total bill annually. To show you how that compares currently with what is recommended for 2025 to other municipalities in the area, you'll see that the gray arrow on the right points you to where your current 2024 rates are. The blue arrow that is further to the left points you at where you would be in 2025 with the new rates that are recommended. I will note that all of the other municipalities, their rates are current 2024 rates, so they may have future increases as well to those. Stormwater is a little bit different, just so that everyone understands stormwater. What stormwater is really rainwater and melting of snow that runs off of streets and lawns and driveways and other hard surfaces that goes into the stormwater system or storm sewers. Hard surfaces such as pavements, roofs, etc., they prevent precipitation or rain from naturally soaking into the ground. And therefore, you have to have a system in place for storm to ensure that you don't have flooding of roads, there isn't flooding backing up onto properties, etc., throughout the system. What has to be done to manage it? Municipalities are required to prevent flooding of the homes, roads, and other businesses. They're also looking to prevent erosion to streams, creeks, and rivers, and to stop harmful pollutants from entering any of the local bodies of water. So the town stormwater management system does work to collect, direct, and control that stormwater runoff. So we have looked at 2 different rate options for your consideration to recover that on a dedicated rate basis. Now, there is a lot of different types of rates for stormwater that could be considered depending on the amount of information you have. Of course, that first one on the top of the list is property taxes. That's how you're recovering the cost of stormwater currently. It's very easy to calculate, just like you do with all of your other expenses that are recovered through taxes, and it ends up being a component of what you recover multiplied by an assessment of a property. It doesn't have a lot of equity because it isn't necessarily as properties change in the amount of permeable pavement they have or don't have. An assessment base doesn't really consider how much rain is actually going into the system off of a property. But it's easy for staff to administer and it's easy for public to understand because it's similar to other tax-supported services. As you move off of that and get into a dedicated rate base, there are various different ways of calculating the rate. You can do it on a flat rate per property. You can do it on a flat rate per property that varies by the type of property. You can also look at the size of properties, and as the size of the property changes, you can vary the rate. It can be specific to every property size, or you can group those into, small, medium, and large, for example, residential or non-residential categories. You can do a utility rate similar to the water wastewater. We don't see that very often. Where you do tend to see that is where it's based on what goes through the water meter. Again, not really a great measure of stormwater, but for municipalities who have combined water or wastewater, sanitary and storm pipes, sometimes that's the way it's done. Outside of that, there are runoff coefficients that dictate how much a property should be having water runoff, and that varies by the type of residential or non-residential property. Where you have that kind of data, that could be applied, or pure imperviousness, where you're measuring every single property and every hard surface on it, and that is, as much as it is the most equitable, it is incredibly difficult for the community to understand. There is a high cost to that to administer, and it just becomes difficult to calculate. You'd need people to actually, every time someone puts up a shed or paves their driveway or puts up a patio, you would have to track all of that. So we haven't put that forward. What we have undertaken, based on the information that you have currently, we've undertaken a flat rate per property that varies by size, as well as just a per property, everyone pays a similar charge type of rate to first look at this. If you were to in the future have more data and get into more details, you might be able to change that, but at this point, based on the data that is available, we've had to look at a flat rate by property and then a flat rate varied by property size and type. Again, similar to the growth forecast for water wastewater, we've looked at the existing number of customers in various different categories for residential and non-residential, and we have assumed some growth as well with those number of properties that will be paying. A lot of times what you'll see is greenfield areas will develop into a subdivision, for example, and instead of having one big vacant property, you'd have a lot of different properties. So we've added that into the forecast period, going upwards of almost 10,860 customers over the forecast period that would be imposed the charge. I do want to note, you'll see that school lands, we've only included 3 schools. Those are private schools. Schools that fall under the public or separate board are actually mandatorily exempt under the Education Act from stormwater rates. Okay. If we're looking at the size of properties, we've looked at the acres of properties. Obviously, the total acres within the town aren't going to change, but as you have properties that are being developed, they're coming off as a big property and coming on as a smaller property with more numbers. But in the end, you still have the same amount of acres in your serviced area. So that doesn't change. It just changes within the categories. The capital needs, similar to water and wastewater, there's about $37 million that have been identified over this forecast period with varying different types of funding sources. There are some grants in there. There are development charges that are anticipated with the new rates put in place, both municipal-wide and area-specific. There is growth-related and non-growth-related debt assumed in here. And there is money coming from a stormwater reserve that we're assuming over the next few years will be established and phased in by transferring some of the money from the tax-supported service where you collect the funding from now over to that dedicated rate to get it kicked off. Similarly, on the asset management, there's about $156 million in change in assets that you have in place currently. We're assuming about 33 million of those will be replaced and or upgraded over this 10-year forecast, and the balance you will need to start saving towards future replacements, about 5.1 million a year. Again, on a per property basis currently, you have already invested about $16,200 per property currently with the assets in place. The operating budget, as noted, there's pure operating costs. We have put those inflationary impacts on that I spoke to earlier, and we are looking at increasing the costs that will need to be recovered from about 1.3 million upwards of 3.1 million over the forecast period on an annual basis. The stormwater capital reserves, that phase in of what we need from the tax supported reserves to come in, it's about 5.6 million in 2025, and then 2.5 million for 26 and 27 to transition. What that looks like for the pure flat rate per property, you would be starting out in 2025 with a charge of $157 and change per property and going up to $278 per property by 2034. If you compare based on an average single detached home that has an assessment of $418,000, they would be paying about $68 now per year. Commercial, a small office, for example, with an assessment of $689,000 would be paying $136 currently in 2024 through their taxes, and a large industrial building that has an assessment of about 1.2 million would already be paying $388 almost annually through their property taxes for this service. The second option is really trying to vary that flat rate by the property size and grouping them into, as I mentioned, small, medium, or large residential, with small residential properties being those that are less than or equal to 0.2 of an acre, medium properties being between 0.2 of an acre and 1 acre, and then other properties, larger ones, being over 1 acre. On the non-residential side, we've looked at that flat rate for properties that are less than an acre. And then for the properties that are greater than an acre, we've looked at putting a rate in per acre. Those rates you can see for the small residential range from $61 a year up to $126. The medium properties from $77 to $378 over the forecast, and the large properties from $248 annually upwards of $1,260 per unit. And then the non-residential, again, similar increases over that forecast period. Again, to look at that as a comparison for other municipalities who actually provide a dedicated stormwater rate and are recovering from that, you can see that for that small residential customer, they would be going in option 1 to paying $157, which is the left side with the arrow. On the right side, option 2, that smaller property would be paying the $64 per year. So that there is quite a range there in the options. What that looks like as a bill impact if you were to add the stormwater dedicated rate to the water and wastewater rates under option 1 is the first table, where the total annual bill would be $1,147 almost, and that would go up to $2,600 and change. What we have shown there is what that is on a cost per day basis. To put it into perspective, you would be paying for water, wastewater, and stormwater services currently about $3.14 per day. And that would increase over the forecast period to $7.17 per day. With option 2 for that smaller residential customer, they would be paying approximately $3.12 currently, and that would increase to about $6.75 per day by 2034. So next steps, we're providing this to get your feedback and the public's feedback this evening so that we can complete the water and wastewater rate, provide a full study that outlines all of the costs, make sure everyone's comfortable with it so that you can come back and pass a bylaw for 2025 rates going forward, as well as to understand where your comfort level is with recommending one of those two options for the stormwater rate. And then there will be that considered on November 18th for new bylaw passages. That is my presentation. I think I made it in time, but I'd be happy to answer any questions from council or the public.
It goes to the public first. So, okay. So if there's questions from the public, I would take them now. Is there anybody on the phone or online, Emmanuel? No. Was there anybody in the gallery who wished to ask a question on this item or make a comment? Yep. Coming up. Yeah. Yes, please.
All right. Matthew Smith, 38 McCarthy Street. This isn't what I had prepared, but I was just thinking about it during the presentation, that for the stormwater fees, I understand the purpose of it, I understand the need of it, but then having the flat rate, either just, whatever it is, $50 a year, $75 a year, or having a flat rate based on property size, I feel is not really fair for in comparison with water and wastewater rates, because those are user-generated, not user-generated rates. How much you consume or how much you need is what you're paying for. But in the case of the stormwater, if you're just being charged because of a large property, you might not have as much runoff as, say, a small property that's almost 100% impermeable surface. So I think that should be taken into consideration. Like I myself, I have my downspouts. I might have a small property. I have my downspouts directed to the lawn. I have lots of gardens, so lots of open soil for the rain to soak in. I try my best to minimize stormwater runoff because I understand how important it is. So I think something like that should be taken into consideration. And I know there's a lot of labor into it if you're going to go with the runoff coefficient. So there's things like orthophoto interpretation where you use GIS, which is what I do as a profession. You use GIS and you actually can examine the properties for the amount of impermeable surface they have, and you can charge them appropriately. I think that's a better way of going about this than just charging someone, not arbitrarily, but saying you have a large property and you have a small property, you're going to be charged this, you're going to be charged this, because your runoff off your properties is going to be different. I know it's more work, more staff effort, but I think that's fair. It's and my parents always say life isn't fair, but trying to make it as fair as I can.
No, thank you, Mr. Smith. I appreciate your comments. I feel the same way, but I understand the recommendations from the consultant as well, just because we also have to look at the administrative costs of trying to do some of those things, and they can be prohibitive if we go that route. So it'll be interesting to hear some feedback and see when the report comes how we can talk about that. Did you want to add anything to that piece, Nancy?
Could be applied. Right now, that is something that, again, is not readily available at the moment. So we were limited to the types of rates that we could look at. That doesn't mean that as more information through GIS in the future that gets updated, it doesn't mean you can't come back and relook at the rate structure at some point in the future if there is more detail available to run it on a different type of rate.
Thank you. CAO Smith?
Yeah, thank you very much. And to follow up on that, we appreciate our trusted consultants' great work. We will be making a staff recommendation on this as well. So they're sharing the options. We're going to be reviewing them based on feedback and come with a recommendation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else in the gallery wish to ask a question or make a comment? Okay, I will turn it over to council then. Councillor Andrews and then Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Nancy, thank you very much for your presentation. Nice to have the detail that you have provided to Council in this public forum. And I do appreciate the amount of detail that is in front of us. A lot of numbers, some percentages that, of course, we have to digest. But I think that what I wanted to focus on is a couple of things. One of which is, can you quantify, and I don't even know if this came up in some form of consultation or calculation about climate change. And I'm wondering, are there some best practices out there with other municipalities within the government world that can help to determine how best we support this, especially from a storm water management perspective? Because I take a look at what from the public comment here from Mr. Smith, from a topographical perspective in our community, and I know that our general manager of infrastructure is very much aware of this, is that we do have, parts of our community that are, affected more, maybe if I put it this way, differently than others when we have, a catastrophic or a heavy rain. And so this is, part of where I'm going with my question to you.
Nancy, go ahead.
Quite often guidelines, especially for development of new properties where you can request low impact development be provided where there is those permanent surfaces more. I would suggest, and wherever that's possible, that in place. There are high density buildings that are getting into having to help mitigate that storm on-site works, at least low runoff where they're collecting and on site and then they slow into the system flooding. That again, through design guidelines, can help to make at least those severe weather patterns, everything going. I would recommend that staff, through their development process, those in place. But there are also potential providing a program for and giving a rebate for that. So some municipalities that have a dedicated street have put it in place, and then as they're implementing that, also looked at whether or not they want to provide some type of discount to people who put in things such as a rain barrel, rain gardens to try and mitigate. However, at the end of the day, if you, as I'm doing that, your costs necessarily % and what it results in typically higher costs for other properties that aren't doing. Still have to cover the total.
CEO Smith has something to add as well.
Yeah, thank you. And again, building on our trusted consultant's answer, she did make reference in the presentation that we've already invested over 16,000 per property. We have a requirement and a responsibility to make sure our existing stormwater management system is working as well as it can. As part of our budget process, you will see some requests for additional resources to make sure it's as efficient. It's almost our first line of, well, it is our first line of defense, making sure the stormwater system is well maintained, well invested in. So we'll be working, and you'll be seeing that as part of the budget process. It's a very high priority for us.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
And thank you again, Your Worship. Again, Nancy, I really appreciate the education component that is, I think, part of this for our residential community as well as our industrial community too. You take a look at options that are out there, and for those of us who've embraced the rain barrel option, it's helped tremendously, but it's just one example. There are many others, and I think that this would be part of maybe that component as we take a look at implementation at whatever it is defined as being. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for the presentation. Very informative. Could we go back to, I think it's page 3 or page 2, where you talk about people that don't have water meters installed? What was the price for that?
maybe of meter has been very difficult potentially right now have it installed. Other 11 customers. And so, you know, rates that are in place are set higher to encourage them to get meter. Don't know by those customers. And so that is a flat rate, but that is where we're expecting over the all of those customers.
Great. What was your flat rate? I think it was a little low on your presentation. Refuse.
They're paying $6
Right.
per year.
Okay. Mr. Koshalak, is that number correct?
Through your worship, that's the historic what they've been charging as part of the water meter replacement program. If people refuse to have a water meter installed, the rate's about triple that. So it'll be about $3,600 per year. So we're going to try and work with everybody to have them replaced, and it's gone very well so far. We have over 25% of the town done for water meters.
Thank you. I guess
CAO Smith has something else to add too.
Yeah, I'll just comment. We're also slowing down their flow as a extra motivation on that.
Thank you. I guess that was the number I was looking for because I knew it was much higher than the 1,200. Yeah, I just want to remind the public that, you know, if you refuse to get a water meter, you're going to be paying what Mr. Koshalak just said. So, okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering, when the report comes from staff, can we have 4 or 5 years past history with the price of what the rate was?
CAO Smith.
Yeah, we can include that.
Thank you. I just
Councillor
like to,
Stevens, do you have any additional?
no, I just wanted to make a comment that I just would like the past history as well for the last 5 years.
Sure. Thank
Thank you.
you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I don't really have a question. I just have a comment, and my comment is really trying to absorb this potential increase of 15% to the base, as well as a 10% water and 5% wastewater. That's a really, really hard hit, I think, right out of the gate. I just wonder why in our past study we didn't make those increases a little bit more sustainable than to all of a sudden hit everybody with these kind of increases. I'm having a hard time really accepting that.
Ms. Neal.
Yeah, through the to try and keep rates lower. At some point, you get to the point where you have no choice but to start replacing the assets that you have in place to ensure that you have a system that is functioning well. You don't want to run into major issues, especially with the drinking water system, or have the wastewater system fail and back up into people's homes either, or businesses. You are getting to a point, a lot of the infrastructure, that you can't defer much longer a lot of the replacement of assets that are needed. And so there is a lot of capital associated with this program. A lot of it is very much front-ended in the next 3 to 5 years. We have tried to smooth that out based on, you may approve a project for 2025, but by the time you design and engineer it and actually construct it and have it done, it might actually take 2 or 3 years to fully pay for it. And we've tried with this rate analysis to actually smooth the rates and the cost, not based on approval to get it tendered in year 1, but actually based on when we think you'll actually have to pay for it, to help actually mitigate what was originally even higher rates and a lot more debt that would have had to have been incurred to do all of it up front. So we have worked very closely with staff to try and keep the rates down as much as possible, and to do it any further really means to bring more of the assets, which in turn can cost more on the operating side. If there's breaks or other issues that you have to go and repair, that can become very expensive. And the risk as well of other issues that could take place in the system. I'll turn it to Tim to provide any additional information.
Mr. Koslek?
Yeah, through your worship, with Councillor Sherwood's question, part of it too is the increase in cost. When we did the last DC study, construction costs were a lot lower. The last 3 years, construction prices have gone up 30, 40%. It's a lot. Even our cost of chlorine went up about 30% since last year. So part of it, they didn't know 5 or 6 years ago when they did the other study what the cost would be now. And I think our consultant did a good point too. Quite often things are deferred a little bit. For a lot of it, we're getting the point we do have to do the work and it results in an additional cost. So I think it's the two things: additional price for consumables for construction and also for products, but also a little bit of a backlog of projects.
Councillor Sherwood?
Follow up, Your Worship. So there's no recommendation here to change the block rate to anything less than the 20 meters. So like right now, we pay $2.13 up to 20. There's no recommendation here to change that block rate to reduce it to that you go to the next rate if you, I think you know what I mean.
Ms. Neal?
That rate structure, that what is recommended is rate within that will increase.
Councillor Sherwood, do you have a follow-up? Okay. CAO Smith?
Mayor, when council's done with their questions, I've got a couple comments I'd like to make, please.
Any additional questions? Okay, I have one question. Ms. Neal, from your presentation on, it was on the life cycle slide, one of the items that you had on there showed an increase in investment, and it was written under water fleet to $10 million. It, just out of curiosity, is that the pull and well? That is that component that's making that increase? I think the recommended was 1 million or 2 million, and the investment is 10 million. Is that because of, is that what water fleet is bringing that new well online?
Yeah. Actually being shifting funded from the rates. So it is your fleet services. That is my understanding. That is the amount. So it might not be.
Okay, thank you. Additionally, I think my last thing is more just a comment, because I know when the public is looking at this, it seems like a significant increase, and none of us want to see increases in anything. And I know we've talked a lot about how this year economics are difficult as a whole, and we know that going into this year's budget is going to be challenging. We know all of these things already. So I know from council's perspective, all of us are looking at this and trying to find ways to make life more affordable for our residents, and seeing an increase in water rates and the addition of a stormwater rate is a challenging piece to look at. But I think it's important that the public knows that, you know, this council that's sitting here today has invested or has inherited a significant asset problem, an infrastructure problem. We have inherited an historical underinvestment in some of our most critical infrastructure pieces, namely water, wastewater, and stormwater. We know that our stormwater system right now is in critical need of infrastructure work. We know that our water system is in the same, and we know that those assets are at the end of life. And the addition of a new rate with stormwater rates, I know, is going to be a challenging piece for the public to understand. And what's happened in the past, though, can't continue to happen. And I think one of those things is that, as Ms. Neal said, projects have been deferred because it's been the easier way to manage the budget and to balance the budget and make the budget a little lower. And we can't continue to allow that to happen. It's irresponsible for us to take care of our infrastructure in that way. And I think going forward, it's going to be really critical, especially as prices for all of these projects have risen. And if they had been done a long time ago when they should have been, we wouldn't be in this position, and they would have cost a lot less back then. But the reality is, from the last time we did the water and wastewater rates, as Tim said, the costs have increased significantly, and we're in a position where we don't have a whole lot of choice. This is all infrastructure that is critical. Of all the things that we do, this is the most important thing that we do, is making sure that our residents have safe drinking water, and that, you know, we're mitigating all of that. So this is a really critical piece, and I know it's not going to be a popular item amongst residents who are watching, but we're really at a point where I'm not sure what else we can do. And I know it, when we looked at the comparator chart, I think it was great to see that we're still not falling amongst the highest in rates. This will still leave us in a position where we're middle of the pack somewhere. So we're not going to be the highest, most expensive water in the province or anything like that, but it is going to allow us to these critical infrastructure pieces that are so crucial as we move forward. So I really wanted that in the public realm for them to understand, for the public to understand that none of us want to raise rates, but I think we're in a position where the infrastructure is in such need that we have no choice at this point. So, Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship. I'm wondering, when staff brings this back for final discussions, would it be possible, and maybe this will be through the treasurer, if we are going to charge a stormwater rate in our property taxes? I would assume right now it's all part of the town rate. It's not going to be divided out separately on the tax bill. It's not going to be shown separately. And then I have another question. Would staff be able to provide us, if we were to go with a stormwater tax rate for the tax bill, since you can provide us what the average assessment, residential assessment property is for when we're doing our budget, could you provide that information to us using the same scenario when it comes to the wastewater, like using the average residential assessment, and what potentially the tax rate would be, how much it would actually cost if we were to do a stormwater bias on property taxes?
With the recommendations that were provided, was that intended to go on the tax bill or on the water, with the water bill? The way I read it was that it would go with our water charges on that portion of the bill. Is that correct? I don't know who wants it, Ms. Neal or CAO Smith.
I'll just comment, because there was a few things in there. It's a leap to say we're moving to a stormwater fee today. So I was saying that we're going to come back with a recommendation. Some communities have done that. It's complicated to take it out of taxes and then have a new line. So we're going to balance that, and we're going to balance with a recommendation on how best to advance. So part of your question was, I think you, in your head, it was that's what we're doing. We're certainly not at that position yet. We may get there in the next couple of weeks, but it's complicated. We've got a new Treasury team. There's lots going on in terms of budget and things like that. So probably if we went that model, you know, my personal opinion is we wouldn't do that this month or December. But my colleagues and I may have a different position when we meet following this meeting. Does that make sense?
Councillor
Yes.
Sherwood?
So Your Worship, I'm just trying to understand the whole recover stormwater through property taxes. Right.
We do that currently, and one of the models that you can do is take it off your tax bill. So let's say the fee is $100. We reduce your tax bill by $100, and we charge you a new fee for $100. Now that's one iteration of that. We could take that $100 off your tax bill and charge you a new fee. And for some of people, it may be $80, and some it would be $120, depending on the different options. So there's a lot of different ways to advance this. The key decision point is, are you taking it off your tax bill and charging separately like we do for water and wastewater? And that's why on the road we'll have a recommendation for council on how we think we should advance in the time frame we've got between now and budget.
Right. So if like I had suggested, Your Worship, that we know what the average assessed value is on a residential property and how much that'll potentially affect them if we do a rate for
Yes.
stormwater on?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any additional questions or comments from members of council? CAO Smith, do you still want a last kick at the can?
In fact, Mayor, you were much more eloquent than I was. You checked more than most of my boxes, so thank you for that.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so last call, everybody's good? All right. The motion right now in the agenda is that report PM 2024-005, 2025 water, wastewater, and stormwater rates be received for information. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh, all in favor. And that is carried unanimously. We will now move into item 8.2, which is the next portion of our public meeting, and this is the 2025 Consolidated Fees and Charges Bylaw, PM 2024-004. Councillor Stephen has declared a conflict and he will be leaving at this time. Okay, if there is anybody who would like to speak to this matter, they're invited to call 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID 112044-629#. Callers will be invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of the meeting presentation. If there's any members of the public connecting via telephone, you're reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Anyone who would like to be notified of further consideration of this topic can submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to Clerk's Department, CLERKSDEPT @orangeville.ca, or call 519-941-0440 extension 2242 and reference 2025 Consolidated Fees and Charges Bylaw, PM 2024-004. Note that any information that is collected is a matter of public record. We will now turn it over to our treasurer, Cheryl Braun. And there is a recommended motion before we turn it over to Cheryl that council waive the 5-minute time frame in the procedure bylaw to permit Cheryl to address council for a maximum of 10 minutes. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Sherwood, all in favor? And that is carried. Ms. Braun, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Post and Council, for this opportunity to provide an overview of one of the elements of our long-term integrated financial strategy related to user fees and charges. As I'm Cheryl Braun, and I'm the CFO and Treasurer for the town, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague Rebecca Medeiros, who was the Deputy Treasurer at the time of this work when it was undertaken. And again, we appreciate the time to present this overview of a consolidated user fee and charge bylaw update to yourselves and the broader community as we embark on an exciting step forward in Orangeville's long-term financial sustainability. The elements of the full long-term integrated financial strategy was outlined for council in June of this year, and several chapters that the plan have been underway since that time during 2024. The core functions of a municipal finance structure have traditionally focused on annual operating budgets, capital programs, and the completion of annual financial statements. A long-term financial strategy applies a disciplined and integrated approach to financial planning through evidence-based decision-making and risk management to promote financial sustainability and flexibility into the long term for the organization. You'll recall that there were a number of guiding principles that were discussed at the time of presenting that integrated long-term financial plan, and they're for you on the screen here tonight. There is a view to trying to create some long-term strategic alignment in all of our plans and ensuring regulatory compliance. It is a holistic approach and it incorporates things such as risk management and ensuring that our revenue streams are diversified and we're not putting too much pressure on our property tax levy. Also included in the guiding principles is some stakeholder engagement in order to improve transparency and accountability. And of course, the overarching principle is sustainability. This chart sort of outlines the many chapters of the long-term integrated financial strategy. And you can see at the very top there, The first chapter that we're here to discuss tonight is the fees and charges bylaw. So the town does provide a number of services for which a fee is charged to an end user in order to recover some or all of the costs of providing that service. And so this approach does reduce the reliance on the property tax levy to fund municipal services, and it also optimizes the town's own source revenues. By consolidating our user fees and charges, there are a number of benefits in doing so. It does provide a unified format that the public can easily find and understand. And it also improves the administrative or reduces the administrative complexity. There is some consistency and streamlining of the work that is undertaken to updating those rates on an annual basis. And again, it does increase transparency and ensures legislative compliance. And of course, the overall goal, again, is that long-term financial sustainability of the town. There are a number of pieces of legislation that govern the implementation of user fees within a municipal environment. So the Planning Act governs fees related to processing of planning applications and those sorts of activities. The Building Code Act governs fees related to administration and enforcement of activities under the Building Code. And then the Bereavement Authority of Ontario oversees the Funeral, Burial and Cremation Services Act with respect to funerals, burials, cremations, and related services within the province of Ontario. And then for some of the remaining fees, mostly in parks and recreation, administration, and infrastructure services, all of those fees are governed by the Municipal Act. Again, just this slide just reiterates that the role of a user fee is to recover some or all of the cost of a service from those who are using the service. And it does provide an element of fairness in that those who benefit from having that service provided to them should really pay for it. So this slide outlines some of the more granular steps that in the process that we undertook at the town to updating the user fees and charges into one consolidated bylaw. So there was a significant effort undertaken to gather information from the various other disparate type of bylaws that the town had at the time and create a list of fees in one consolidated list. That enabled us to more easily undertake some benchmarking activities comparing to some of our neighboring municipalities just to make sure, taking a look at where our rates kind of fell in terms of what our neighbors were charging for similar services. Senior staff did review the proposed fee structure and made some adjustments where they felt it was appropriate to reflect legislative requirements. And then all of this work culminated into a compilation of our fee schedules into one document in a consistent format. Also in that document was some updates and clarifications made for whether or not HST was applicable to a particular fee. And then finally, our consolidated user fees and charges bylaw was prepared with a full schedule of fees, which also included references to various acts under which those fees were being charged, and then provided effective dates, most of which did start on January 1st, but some of the fees do start for recreation services. They'll start on March 1st, April 1st, and July 1st, according to some of the program needs. The next couple of slides kind of give a very high-level overview of the range of increases that are being proposed for different types of services. So you'll see here for some of the administrative fees, there was no need to increase, but some were falling quite far behind some of the charges that we were receiving from banks and the like. So some of our fees have gone up 80% for administrative type activities. For building permits, it was relatively easy looking at industry standards. It seemed that a 3% increase was appropriate. And then for some of our recreation programs and special events, some of those fees hadn't been reviewed since 2020. And so along with some benchmarking and review of the actual cost of the service, some of those fees were increased more significantly at the higher end of that range at 25%. Some of the smaller value fees were increased by maybe 50 cents, and that also contributed to like a 25% increase because 50 cents is not a large dollar amount. For parks and rec, or sorry, facilities and parks, again, the range of increase, similar story, no increases since 2020. So some benchmarking was done and a revisitation of what the cost of the services were. And so some of the increases were ranging from 6 to 20%. For clerks, there's fees for licensing, sign permits, and those types of things. There was some significant work done looking at benchmarking. And so some of those rates stayed flat, and while others were increased up to 20%. For planning, this is a very, the numbers look quite dramatic here, but a very, very detailed cost recovery review was done for our planning fees. And this fee structure probably was one that had most of the most dramatic changes. The last updates for some of these fees was back in 2017, so they were quite dated by now. And so we undertook a more detailed costing to try to update the rates to ensure that they reflected more of the actual staff and resource time required to do the planning reviews and those sorts of things. Cemeteries. The cemetery service has a number of fees for plots, columbarium, niches, and internment charges. So again, you know, the average increase, there were some changes, there were some fees for which there was no changes, but some were increased up to 20%. For fire, there's a number of different types of fees, quite astonishingly, for inspections, burn permits, open air burning offenses, fire watch standby charges, and the like. So there were some new fees introduced for recovery of actual costs of hazardous material cleanups, as well as for extended emergency responses in excess of 4 hours. Those are two new fees that are being proposed for 2024. But the rest of them were the rest of the fees were more in line with benchmarking and aligned for those purposes. No changes are actually recommended for advertising in arenas. Some fees were actually removed as that type of advertising is no longer being provided. And then finally, for libraries, some of the fines and non-resident fees that are included in this service area, they're going up by approximately 2%. And so before I entertain questions, just the next steps on this, there will be a report coming to Council on November 18th alongside the water, wastewater, and stormwater rate study for approval. But with that, maybe I'll turn it over back to the chair and entertain any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Braun. We do have one registered delegate. Mr. Ramsey from Feed Street would like to delegate regarding non-resident user fees, so I'll invite him up to that chair if I could. And just a reminder, Mr. Ramsey, you've got 5 minutes for delegation. The mic is already on, so you're good to go.
Is it on?
Yep.
Sorry, I thought I had 10, but I shouldn't take that. And it pertains a lot to what was just discussed. My name is Noel Ramsey. As you mentioned, I live on Feed Street here in Orangeville. As a resident and taxpayer here in Orangeville, I'm here this evening to discuss the proposed fees associated with using the aquatic facilities, specifically at Alder Street. We know that when it comes to reviewing the town's budget, one of the major cost areas is Parks and Rec. And from history, we know that the Alder Street pool has and continues to be a significant portion of the Parks and Rec budget. Now, I don't have the exact numbers, but the 2024 budget shows that the operating expenses to be 2.8 million, and that's not for Alder Street alone, but it's under recreation and events. Also, operating expenses of 4 million under facilities, which also covers Alder Street. In addition, there's also significant dollars in the capital budget associated with Alder Street. Plus, in the 2023 year-end consolidated financial report of the town, it shows 8.2 million of expenses under the recreation services. So you can see it's difficult for us to know what the associated costs are specifically for the aquatics department at Alder. Although we don't recover all the costs through user fees, I believe it's important to know what it costs to maintain and operate the pool, the facility, and the programs associated with the pool. So my first ask, and I have one at the end as well, my first ask is to have the town identify and report the costs associated with the Alder Street pool in the same manner that it shows on the town's consolidated financial statements. That is the breakout of salaries and benefits, interest and debt, materials and supplies, contracted services, other transfers, rents, and amortization. And that's how it's shown on the consolidated financial statement. It just doesn't break out that facility versus all of recreation. To continue, from the 2024 budget document under how we measure in recreation and events, it states that we're providing 1,271 hours of pool time. Where Aquafit can take up to 60 people for 45 minutes, other programs like Learn to Swim and Lane Swim can take up to 25 people for an hour, so it's a mix. It could be less than this, but if we assume on average there's always 40 people in the pool each hour, this would equate to approximately 50,000 slots that people could be in the pool. Prior to hearing back on my first request, what the total pool cost per year, we could say that if you divide every $1 million of expense by the 50,000 swimming slots, it would cost the town's taxpayers approximately $20 for when someone gets in the water. If the cost is $1.5 million, that 20 would go up to $30. If it's $2 million, it would go up to $40 and so on. Now, these are approximations based on the numbers I can see from the documents available from the town. But regardless, we know that it's very expensive to have the pool and add on the approximately $10 million to upgrade and repair it. Even if that was spread out over multiple years, it's hard to imagine that it's not costing millions of dollars a year worth of expense to maintain the facility. Regardless of how accurate you think my math is, we know that the fees collected does not cover the pool's expense, and the difference is picked up by the town's taxpayers. I have no complaints with this, as it's a valuable service provided to the town's residents. The issue I'm raising is that the 25% proposed uplift charged to non-residents does not come close to recovering these expenses. We as taxpayers should not be paying the bill to cover the cost to provide the service to non-residents. Either the non-resident or their municipality should be covering the full cost of their participation. I have heard that in some municipalities that they may reimburse their residents for some of these surcharges that we would charge. Or another thing, the town could negotiate with these other municipalities to pay upfront for some of our significant expense. Or the worst option is don't allow them to participate. Either way, our taxes should not be used to pay for their participation. Now, some people might think that we should not be taking this position. I would remind them that Orangeville has some of the highest municipal taxes in Ontario. Consider our tax rate is 0.89%. Amaranth is 0.64. East Garifaxa is 0.58, and Mono is less than half of ours at 0.40. The bottom line is, I believe we should not be paying for the cost of their participation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramsey. I think you're preaching to the choir because we all believe the same thing. I think I can speak for council when I say that, you know, we're all in a position where we know that we need to change the way that we recover money from our neighbors. We've talked about this when it comes to recreation. We've talked about it when we talk about fire. We've talked about it when we talk about a lot of services in the town of Orangeville. And the reality is, being the larger urban hub in a primarily rural municipality, we have become that provider of services. And it's gone on for a really long time where the Orangeville taxpayer has been subsidizing those services for the neighbors. And we've had a number of conversations, myself and the CAO and myself and members of council, on how we can rectify that. And we're working on that. So that is something that is in the process. And our CAO has a great relationship with the neighboring CAOs to talk about how we can start making it more equitable, especially when recovering capital costs more so than operating. That's where we run into the primary problem, and where we run into the significant amount of costs. So making sure that our neighbors are helping to contribute to the reserve that we have for capital projects, so that when large capital things come up, we've already got a reserve that our neighbors have helped pay for, as well as them paying their fair share of their operating costs. So we are working on it.
Okay, I know that you're working on it, but since we are actually paying the money for it, I would employ you to stop paying the money to cover their participation. If we don't allow them to participate, and with the good relations that we have, if that's clearly communicated, then they should have a mandate by come January the 1st. Either they tell their residents they can't participate, or someone pays that bill instead of me, period.
No, I hear you. CAO Smith, do you want to add anything?
Not much more, Mayor, except that it is on our radar. Mr. Ramsey asked a very similar comment at the Mayor Town Hall. We responded with a very similar response. It is on our radar. We are working on it. I know it sounds like a broken record, but there's many priorities, and Mr. Ramsey is adept at identifying them for us and helping us focus that. So we appreciate that, and it is something that we know needs to improve with the cooperation of our neighbors, and their valued neighbors. And we do, in many cases, we do rely on their participation to lower the operating costs as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Appreciate you being here and delegating today. Was there any other questions? First of all, was there anybody participating online, Emmanuel, that needs to? No? Okay. Was there anybody in the public in the gallery who wished to ask a question or make a comment on this item? No? Okay, so I will turn it over to members of council. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Braun, thank you for your detailed high-level delivery of this particular presentation. I'm going to get into the weeds just very quickly, and this was one of the last items that was actually on your slide deck, and this was advertising. I was quite surprised to see that there was no increase whatsoever, and not to say that we want to impose opportunities of increased costs for advertising, but I think that this is a kind of a missed opportunity. Having said that, I was also curious to find out what has been omitted, because one thing that I noticed on this list, if I recall, we had some banner advertising that was in fact included at our arenas around, in particular, the Green Rink walking track. But, in times of challenges, this is one that I think that, personally, we could possibly look at ways of maybe rethinking this.
Ms. Doherty, can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Andrews. It is something that staff have considered this year. There were a variety of things, and to answer your question on what was omitted, we looked at a variety of things, including the doors into the rinks. So both Alder Recreation Centre and Tony Rose Memorial Sports Centre had advertising on the doors. We also had advertising on the stairs in the arena in Red Rink, and to your point of banners. What we looked at was the effectiveness and efficiency of all of those advertisements and the aesthetics of the recreation centers. So that's the first step that we took in reviewing, and we consolidated it into an approach that would have more impact for the advertiser. So that's where we looked at, and in that, the recommendation of keeping the fees the same and not increasing those because there was a change is where we came up with those recommendations.
Was there any additional questions from members of council? No? Okay, we are good. There is a motion in the agenda here that report PM 2024-004 consolidated fees and charges be received for information. Can I have a motion to receive, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Sherwood, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Can someone let Councillor Stevens know to come back in, please? Welcome back, Councillor Stevens. We will move straight into bylaws then. The recommendation is that the bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed, which is the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville at its council public meeting held today, October 28, 2024. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh, all in favor? And that is carried. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Stevens, all in favor? Also carried. Thank you for joining us tonight.